Welcome to the ITSP Magazine Podcast Network. You're listening to a new Redefining Cybersecurity podcast with Sean Martin. Have you ever thought that we're selling cybersecurity insincerely, buying it indiscriminately, and deploying it ineffectively? Well, perhaps we are. So let's look at how we can organize a successful InfoSec program that integrates people, process, technology, and culture to drive growth and protect business value. Knowledge is power. Now, more than ever.
Imperva is the cybersecurity leader whose mission is to protect data and all paths to it with a suite of integrated application and data security solutions. Learn more at imperva.com.
HITRUST is a leading data protection standards development and certification organization that strives to safeguard sensitive information and manage information risk for global organizations across all industries and throughout the third-party supply chain. Learn more at hightrustalliance.net.
And here we are. You're very welcome to a new episode of Redefining Cybersecurity here on ITSP Magazine. This is Sean Martin, your host, and as those watching, yes, we do occasionally do a video podcast here to bring faces to bear. And the bear face today is our good friend Matthew Rosenquist. And Matthew, it's always a pleasure.
Pleasure to be here.
we get to talk about all kinds of fun things on many different channels. We did a Crucial Conversations not too long ago. That one's not published yet, but that one's coming. And you've been on Audio Signals and Redefining Cybersecurity and the Other Society, and you've helped contribute to tons of things from ITSP Magazine, even including a European Liberal Forum article that we put together. So lots of good stuff. It's always great to have you on. Your mind blows me away every time we have a chance to chat. And today's topic, I get the tenfold mind blowing. So we're gonna look back on you looking forward from last year to now, and kind of unpack some of the predictions you made for 2022. And I'm gonna be brutally honest, and we're gonna have a good old tug of war. How well did you predict the future back then? And we'll see how that's shaping up for this next year. And I'm gonna give a shout out to Marco. He was supposed to be here to tag team and double up on the beating up, but he's off taking a break. So we'll let him do that, and you get half the trouble today. Matthew.
I'm sure I'll have a conversation in the future, and he will catch up. I'm sure he never misses the beat when there's an opportunity to be brutal.
That's right.
Yes,
that's right. So take it and run with it as a start to 23, and you'll carry that burden with you until you meet him again. All right. So this is inspired by a post you did on LinkedIn. Trying to think if it shows here when you posted it. December 30th, 2021 is when you posted it. It's just at the end of the year, 2021. Looking at 2022, and you made 10 predictions. I mean, some pretty big buckets of topics there. This isn't ransomware is going to grow 5% or threat actors are going to be. I mean, we're talking big bucket things here. As a general overview, how well do you think you did? Or were you kind of in the ballpark with some of this stuff?
I think I was in the ballpark. And, the benefit of predictions, especially when you publish them, is you get to go back and you get to see, did you get it right? Did you have the major momentum, the broad strokes right? Were you able to narrow things down? And there's lots of different companies and people that do predictions. And honestly, most of them cheat. They'll say things like malware will be bad, more ransomware attacks, right?
Right.
And very vague, very general. That really doesn't help anybody. And so it's trying to find that balance between talking about important things and getting down to a reasonable level of detail that's actionable, but not, I mean, we truly don't have a crystal ball to say exactly how much is going to happen, but we can start bringing in trends. And if it is valuable, if people that are doing predictions do get relatively close in this chaotic kind of world, that is a benefit moving forward, because those that do have some semblance of insights on what's going to happen have a big advantage. And so that's what's all this about. And that's why I love coming in and talking about what we got right, what we didn't get right, as we move forward. Because if you're not, rating it, then you don't have the feedback, you're not getting any better, and we really need to be able to look forward. So overall, I think I did okay, but it's all a matter of perspective. I think we need to talk about the finer points for each one of these.
We will certainly do that. But one more thing before we get into that, to the list of 10. Do you, when you're putting this together, I mean, I do a lot of writing stuff too, and I'm wondering how you approach it. Do you have kind of a call to action in mind, and who you're writing for and what you hope they will take from it? Or do you, for example, I want CISOs to have an action plan of 1, 2, 3 based on these 10 things? Or do you say, screw that for this. This is just about me analyzing the market, and I'm not going to do anything specific to any particular audience. I'm just going to present what's in my head based on the experiences I've had, research I've done, interactions I've had with folks.
It's definitely more of the latter, right? I do a lot of pieces throughout the year and saying, hey, you need to do this, or this is a weakness, or this should be what we're doing. This analysis, the predictions, doesn't look at any of that. It really looks at the fundamental drivers, the engine behind cybersecurity. And honestly, that actually starts with the attackers. The attackers are what move us. They have the initiative. It is based on what they do is what determines what the security folks and technologies and services, how they will evolve, right? And the combination of that, as well as the battlefield, right? What is changing within the IT or digital landscape itself? Now we can start understanding what is going to make it through the cracks, what is going to blindside us potentially. And that's what I'm talking about. Everybody knows there's going to be more spam and phishing and ransomware and things like that. But if we can start getting more detail around those inner workings, those gears and those cogs, then we can start discussing in much more detail avenues and breakouts that we would expect.
And let's get into it. You mentioned cracks, and I'm thinking the first point here, you'll understand why I'm going with this. There's a movie with a guy putting his finger in holes where water's coming through in the dam. I think it's Vacation, Chevy Chase, right? So the first one on the list is critical infrastructure is a prime target. I don't know if dams, certainly I believe
dams are part of critical infrastructure.
Right?
Yes, it is.
I don't know if they actually had any incidents in 2022, but nonetheless, there's water. I know water is a big topic of discussion in the West Coast, and who knows if that's moving east or not, but certainly clean water is important all around the world, and managing that to not just store it, but to distribute it properly and use it.
And to filter it, to clean it, potable water, you've got wastewater, things of that sort. Yes, that's one of the
irrigation for food. Food's kind of important too. Yeah.
Food, not only growing it, but also processing, logistics, and transportation to get it to our grocery stores. Yes, that's another one. Telecommunications, power generation, including nuclear power. There's a whole bunch. National defense industries. There's, you name it. Anything that we need for our daily lives and comforts. Including those government services and our ability to form a new government, all of those all fit in within critical infrastructure. And we saw in this last year, lots of attacks across all of those sectors. You had mentioned, water supply, wastewater. We saw cyber attacks against that. We saw attacks against, and again, it's not only even the United States. This is globally. We're seeing attacks against nations, government agencies, healthcare. Healthcare really kind of got brutalized in 2022 with a lot of data breaches, a lot of ransomware. So there were a lot of attacks against critical infrastructure. And the good news is, out of all of that, a lot of them were defeated. A lot of them were intercepted or detected early, and the risks or the impacts minimized because the risks were recognized ahead of time. Not in all cases. We saw lots of hacks out there and lots of attempts, especially right after kind of February timeframe. A government that is not, well, I'll name it, right? Russia, invaded Ukraine. And as part of that, there were all sorts of attacks, not only against Ukraine, but also against EU, the United States. And that it wasn't as big as we thought it would be. And the other factor there is there was public-private partnership. And I'll call out Microsoft as probably the best. They went in very early and started recognizing these critical infrastructure attacks and responding, not after the fact, but as they were going on. And so it wasn't, we're going to respond a day or 2 days after. They were responding within minutes of seeing some of these attacks and actually able to shut them down in record time in cooperation with Ukraine and with US and other allies. So the number of attacks we're definitely there, but not successful, which is a good thing.
Yeah. And to this point, because you mentioned Microsoft, we can easily see them in the world of IT. But in your prediction, you reference the whole old OT, operational technology space. And I know there's been a lot of talk about bringing those two worlds together from a security and risk management perspective. Perhaps funding the OT folks with security knowledge and or arming them with security knowledge and tools, but then the overall view of that. So I don't know how much Microsoft plays in the OT world. I'm sure they do, but SCADA's in there, scanners for healthcare, all kinds of stuff is in the OT world. So with respect to your prediction specifically now on OT and IT, you said we're going to see a blend of that, certainly from an implementation perspective. How about the security perspective and attacks? Do we see crossover on attacks hitting OT, moving to IT or whatever, laterally or whatnot?
So we're definitely seeing the attackers go into the OT space as well. But a lot of those, because again, it's a little bit different environment. It's not your pure Windows environment. It's pure cloud or data center. You've got IoT and IIoT, industrial IoTs and those kinds of things, and dedicated hardware, runtime operating systems. It's very, very specific. We are seeing attacks going into that space, and we're seeing big suppliers in that space being targeted, right? Siemens has been targeted. Honeywell has been targeted. Why? Because they manufacture and assemble and deploy and support those OT environments. So we've seen hacks go after them, especially in the area of discovering vulnerabilities. A lot of time and effort in 2022, and this isn't going to change for 2023. This is only going to get worse. A lot of resources have been put to find vulnerabilities in those systems and targeting basically supply chain for the OT world to be able to attack at scale. So we have seen those attacks. And Microsoft, it's got its fingers everywhere, and there's lots of companies that are working on both sides. The attacks that we're seeing are more specific in the OT world to the OT world, and not necessarily I make one attack and it hits IT and OT equally or kind of with the same code. It tends to be more specific at this point because the OT attacks haven't matured yet. They're getting there. We're seeing the funding, we're seeing the resources, but not anywhere near the level of our normal digital world around, Windows and Linux and things of that sort.
So you talk about Microsoft doing good work there and
Mhm.
and identifying and stopping attacks. Um, the next item on your list is that the government, law enforcement, would actually step up their game
Mhm.
and actually get involved. So I'm wondering how that looked across the year, and did Microsoft alleviate some of that work for them? Did they actually step up and I don't know how. I'm trying to think of how much you covered here, but there's the actual identification, blocking. I don't know if you then do the attribution and take somebody down. How does that all look from?
Yeah, Microsoft actually is one of the premier teams that works with law enforcement to not only detect, but then again to dive in to figure out that attribution, to enumerate the infrastructure that the attackers are using, and then actually work with law enforcement, and not just US law enforcement, but law enforcement around the world to go after those assets. And this is something that they are refining. It used to take years, literally years, to figure out what kind of infrastructure the bad guys were using and try and figure out those domains and take them over, or seize servers and gather information. Now, Microsoft has narrowed that down to weeks. And in some cases, especially after February, it was a matter of days and in some cases, even hours that they were able to do that. And when you've got, the Ukrainian government, obviously very open to that kind of assistance and willing to act very quickly on any real-time intelligence, things started to move very, very fast. And so they were able to identify a lot of resources and domains and simply take them over, right? And deny the attackers the ability. And they've got one of the premier, most respected teams out there that works with law enforcement. FBI, they've partnered with FBI for probably since their inception. And they're considered some of the best in the industry. So law
Um,
enforcement definitely works with the private sector and in many cases relies on it. Although organizations like the FBI over the past several years have really groomed their own internal resources, but even those are going to reach out to private companies and counterparts and experts in particular areas.
yeah, because three of your predictions kind of revolve around this point. You have government stepping up their game, law enforcement showing uh, strong strength or improving their strength in the space, and then you mentioned the public-private engagements. And I think I saw some point about tooling in there as well. So I'm just wondering. Uh, I think. Well, what am I thinking here? That a lot of the communications I see from the industry, cybersecurity industry, is about protecting the environment itself. So protecting the police force, protecting the investigators, protecting the legal teams, the prosecutors and the attorneys and whatnot, protecting those environments that these agencies and institutions run within. And I see less about broader monitoring. I know when we were in LA, I forget, it was some Pepperdine event. We had the LA security lab. I can't remember the formal name for it. I believe there's one in New York. I'm sure there are many all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Have we seen those actually step up and use tools for monitoring and shared security and services and response and things like that? And again, public-private sector perhaps come into play there as well.
Yeah, the number of security researchers and security firms that do research and investigations, right? It helps their brand and does some, typically it aids their services or products. That has increased again. We hit kind of a plateau for a while, and now suddenly there's lots of more groups doing that and seeing the benefit of it. So we are seeing more on the private side. We are seeing more on the private public side, right, where they're collaborating. We've got CISA or CISA, I guess as they would pronounce it, right, and Jen Easterly now coming to the helm of that and really kind of leading that organization and fostering. She has a great reputation in the cybersecurity community and even the hacker community. And she's very friendly. She's very open, very matter of fact, very pragmatic. And she understands that there is a tremendous resource on both sides of the fence. And so building and fostering ties between it, the public and private side, benefits both. And for the first time in a long time, the industry has said yes, and this makes sense. And instead of it just being a one-way street, maybe we're going to get something out of this, right? This is going to help everybody. And that's really a good thing. It's a good thing for everybody, except for the attackers, the offensive side. It's good for cybersecurity. It's good for the defenders. So we're seeing more in that space. But again, and I think this goes down to the last of my predictions, right? There is always a limit to that. Unless you're truly seeing something benefiting your organization when budgets are tight, right? If you're not seeing direct benefits and, the public or private sector is providing information to the public sector, but not getting much back, that's where you've got potential tension. And you may have degradation of a willingness to contribute. And so that's something that CISA has to deal with moving forward. And even recently, they were criticized by Congress of not doing enough.
Right.
Ironically, many people in the general cybersecurity community came, to their side and started defending their reputation, saying, yeah, they haven't succeeded at solving world hunger, but they've done so much more than the past several years beforehand. And we're seeing a great trend moving forward. We're positive about it. And we think, CISA is doing a good job, and it's just getting better for everyone. So that's telling.
Yeah, it is. And I know the organization has a lot of respect, a lot of individuals working with Jen as well, have grown up in the industry and bring a lot of their relationships to bear as well. And I'm just wondering on this point, because I know there was it a breach notification, national breach notification announced this year?
Yeah,
I can't remember all the details,
release alerts.
Right. And I'm just wondering how, it's maybe a little off topic, just wondering how that changes because if you're forced to now, does that change how companies perceive the willingness to share information, right? Well, now I'm forced to, I'm going to do the bare minimum because I have to, and I'm going to move on, versus really building a relationship. Is maybe a little, again, off topic from predictions, but I think it's an interesting point.
Yeah, so they do a couple of things. They do release, basically it's a heads up that we have intelligence. We can't tell you about the intelligence, but we believe certain threat actors, in most cases nation states, are going to target certain sectors. It's pretty generic, to be perfectly honest. And from a tactical perspective, it doesn't really provide the cybersecurity analysts or CISO with direct information. Oh, I need to look for this specific type of attack or these IP. It doesn't provide that level. But what it does do is it gives them air cover. And what I mean by that is if you're in healthcare, for example, you're constantly fighting for cybersecurity budget. And it's your word against the business objectives and everything else. But when CISA comes out and says, hey, healthcare industry, we expect healthcare industry to be attacked, that gives the CISO the ability to go to the board, to go to the CEO and say, hey, look what the government, the official, statement from the government is, our sector is going to be attacked. And that helps them in justifying budget, in getting new programs approved and deployed. So it provides that level of air cover. Now, when it comes to requirements, CISO really isn't mandating requirements on the private sector. However, because of executive orders and other things in the government sector, as well as, defense industries and suppliers to government, they are putting rules in place. And so CISA is weighing in on those, and those are required. And so again, their fingers are all over the place. They're helping everywhere that they can with the resources they have. So that does help, especially because they can be very specific in, what zero trust technologies or capabilities, for example, really need to be deployed and where should they be deployed first. CISA can come out and talk about those, and that is detailed enough for that purpose.
Yeah, excellent point. So that kind of covers 2 and 10 predictions. 2 and 10. I don't know, we may cross 10 again. Who knows? Number 4 was lumped in there from law enforcement. So I'm going to press you on this one because I think we talked about seeing actual criminal cases, right, and outcomes from that. Do you think we did enough there in 2022?
Well, in the beginning part of the year, especially the first quarter, there were quite a few announcements of takedown of this group or this infrastructure, or they identified these people and issued, warrants for arrest, international warrants. And we saw some of those. So there were some good cases that came to fruition that really kind of put pressure on several of those cyber criminal groups and cyber mercenary groups. In fact, one of the most prolific and successful ransomware groups, R-Evil or Re-Evil, depending on how you want to pronounce it, they were targeted because they were really so successful at ransomware. And, the law enforcement started going after them. And they announced, hey, we're all retiring. We're done. R-Evil is done. We're retiring. We're not around anymore. Right. And we've heard this before from all sorts of cyber criminal groups. And the reality is they're all driven by greed anyway. So they all come back. But we did see some good cases, especially earlier in the year. And that really put pressure on some of the cyber criminal groups. They were also distracted a little bit because there was, this international war basically going on over in Ukraine, and a lot of the same resources are doing there. And there was some fracturing and infighting. But what we've seen towards the back half of the year is much less when we're talking about cases being announced. And many of those were really focused on nation states, the actual, government workers committing certain crimes. And again, priorities, right? Are you going to go after the organized cyber criminal that's just stealing a few dollars? Or are you going to go after the nation state that's, fleecing millions of dollars and funding that into a military program that could be launching missiles in the South China Sea or something? Who knows? So priorities make sense there. But we've also seen an uptick now in those cyber criminals. And law enforcement really hasn't been able to stem that tide for in the back half of the year. We're hoping that their funding will increase and their capabilities will increase and the cooperation across public and private will increase so that those organizations can be targeted. But right now, they're having more of a tough time at the end of this year. Again, they may just be building their cases. So we may see another influx in Q1, Q2 of next year of successes. I hope so.
Yeah. Yeah. So many thoughts. I was thinking about lots of fun things going on in New York City with surveillance and surveillance from government, surveillance from private entities, and that information used. I don't know. It's a totally different thing, but it's a lot of stuff coming to mind there. Maybe we have another chat about
that. and that's where you
banning people from attending events because they're on some list and they facially recognize them. Yeah.
Are you on one of those? No, I don't want to know. I don't want to know.
I don't want to know either. So, all right. So you've mentioned ransomware a number of times, and that's actually number 3 on the list. And let's just go straight to a detailed point you made in there, that the impact, not just the amount of, not just the price of payment, but the actual impact, which could be monetary payouts, could be down systems, lost revenue, loss of life. So you're saying at least 10x for 2022 over 2021, I presume, and
Yes.
I suspect there's a number in your head.
Well,
How do you come up with that?
tough.
I know.
And I have to admit, I don't know if we reached 10x, because we knew there was going to be a slowdown in the first kind of half, and then it would pick back up, which it really kind of did. But from a dollar impact, and I've been reading reports compared to 2021, the dollar impact is not 10x. So I did not hit that. But if we do look at some of those other aspects, for example, Conti, famous ransomware group, right? They actually held hostage an entire country, Costa Rica. They conducted a ransomware attack and held the entire government and country, right? And tried to extort them. So was there a societal impact? I would say yes. For that society, that country, that was big. We've seen other ransomware, whether it be Lapsus, which is more relatively new, their Rampage, Hive ransomware, we've seen, which have been targeting businesses and critical infrastructure. Maui, Conti is still active. Killnet. In fact, we saw a shift with ransomware. Again, it's still ransomware. It's still the same things by these groups. But towards the beginning of the year, many of them changed their tactics. And again, this is probably a result of geopolitical conflicts in Europe, where some of those groups, instead of simply saying, hey, we want money and we will decrypt your files, they weren't going to decrypt the files. It was really about deploying a wiper and destroying, right, those critical files of these targets. And we saw, 6? Well, if you count variants, maybe 8 major wipers get released in a very short period of time in the February, March, April timeframe, where when it was targeting critical infrastructure and big businesses, sure, it would say, yes, you have to send us Bitcoin or whatever, Monero, whatnot. But even if you sent it to them, your files were done, right? It was just about destruction. They were laying waste, sowing salt, if you will, on the digital landscape. So the impacts to that are even more devastating. Because unfortunately, some countries and governments and businesses and organizations do pay, and sometimes they get their files back, or at least some of them, and it's less impactful. But in this case, we saw a complete shift. And Australia was also hit with ransomware, with data breaches, and they responded, in kind of a visceral way. The government and the Congress over there, the legislature, said, we've had it. And basically started assembling a group of legal and law enforcement and digital experts and cybersecurity people. And they're going down the path to try and track these organizations down, try and block them in a proactive way, try and build processes and capabilities to be able to detect and respond to them faster and better to minimize losses on the back end. They've even started working on trying to pass a law to prohibit the payment to digital extortion, which is something I talked about a couple of years ago and said, if you really wanted to get rid of ransomware, this is the way you did it. You cut off the money supply. Australia is kind of the first country that is saying, yeah, we're definitely interested in that, and we're starting to draft legislation. So, and that's radical. That is radical. It can be effective, but it's radical. So again, because of the impacts, we've seen responses from different governments and organizations out there. And I have to admit, I don't think we hit the 10x on the back end coming out of 2022 as compared to 2021 in ransomware, not from a pure dollar sign, but I would say we did have significant impacts to society, to governments, to countries, and to industries. Healthcare industry panicked in 2022 about data breaches and ransomware, and they were already spending money. They doubled their efforts because they were worried about that. We saw telecommunications. We saw every critical infrastructure sector step up because they were worried about it. And especially when those wipers hit, everybody took a deep breath and said, okay, we need to focus on this. So ransomware did play a big role. I'm not sure if it was 10x the losses, but definitely played a big role in 2022.
Yeah, so a lot of growth, redoing of the tactics, of course, and techniques. Any sense for? And you mentioned kind of the government-led activities in some places. Do you have any sense of the protections and risk mitigation efforts put in by the industry and by organizations? Do you feel that they rode the wave up with, okay, this is really an important thing. Let's get our backups. Let's get our access controls. Let's get our MFA and all that stuff in place to kind of mitigate some of this?
Yeah, I think they did. I think the smart CISOs out there and savvy organizations, boards, and C-suites realize this is a material risk. And every news story, World Economic Forum, G7, everybody's talking about it. It's something we can't ignore. And these organizations typically then took that first step. Okay, let's get the basics in place. And once that was in there, they started talking about, okay, what else can we do? And that's a little unusual conversation for an organization that typically does not generate revenue, right? What else? How else can we spend on this? And it's refreshing, and you have to take advantage of it while that's there. We even had a lot of momentum and focus on zero trust. It became one of the big buzzwords of 2022 in the cybersecurity realm. I had board members, people that weren't even all that technical, go, yeah, we should do zero trust. And I'd ask them, do you know what zero trust is? No, I don't know what it is, but it sounds like we definitely need to do that. Okay, great. Let's build a zero trust strategy. So there was enthusiasm, there was momentum. I fear as we go into this next year, and there's going to be economic challenges, budgetary challenges, and therefore prioritization of where you're going to spend that budget within organizations, I think we're going to see a contraction in the motivation and enthusiasm to spend money in cybersecurity and privacy. And that will have, unfortunately, some consequences.
Yeah, there's a whole big world of economics there that we could unpack if we had time. Just, I don't know, reduction in force in many companies, people that are skilled, no other jobs available, cybercrime.
Well, we're going to talk about that more.
A decent opportunity. Let's. You gave the example of legislation in Australia, but your fifth, so kind of leading from that to your fifth prediction is around geopolitics and foreign policy and cyber tooling as a way to conduct international business relations.
Well, it's not even business relations, right? It's foreign policy tools by governments.
Yeah, I picture the government's
agenda,
business.
Right? Geopolitical agenda.
Yeah.
And
so talk to me a little bit about this point.
Okay.
What were you really trying to communicate with this, and how did that flesh out?
Well, again, every country has their own political agenda on the international landscape of politics. And maybe they want to expand their borders. Maybe they want to be recognized as the international currency. Maybe they want, better, lower tariffs and trade, or to have sanctions removed. Who knows? Every country is a little bit different. But there are only a certain set of tools available over the last 20, 50, 100 years, right, to be able to push those. And one of them obviously has been military. If you don't like what your neighbor's doing, right, they're not trading the grain that they have with you, or they have diamonds or oil or whatever, you invade, you go take it. Okay, we've become a little bit more civilized in general, and that's happened less often. But military is one of those ways to influence a political agenda, right? Why does the United States have 13 aircraft carriers, right? It's force projection. It's defense, but it's also, if I park that carrier out, off your coast, my voice tends to have a little bit more strength behind it when we talk about things. Okay. There's economic benefits. We can pay money, we can subsidize tariffs. But what we're seeing now is another lever is offensive cybersecurity. Okay, so take, for example, if I'm an oil producing nation, right? And you don't like what I'm doing politically, and I don't like what you're doing. And so you start cutting off the supplies that I'm giving you, right? And we saw this with Russia. Russia was providing all sorts of liquefied natural gas and oil products into Europe. Okay. Europe decided, hey, we're going to start turning that off. Well, Russia didn't really like that. Do you know where the next series of cyber attacks went to? Internal capabilities to be able to get oil and fuel and so forth from other countries. We saw oil refineries being attacked with cyber attacks. We saw oil storage. We saw distribution of liquefied natural gas, right? Those kind of capabilities start to get attacked. I wonder, right? Who could possibly be doing that? Well, we found out. We know who. But again, you can now start, without having to roll tanks over the border per se, you can use cyber attacks, offensive cyber attacks, to affect politics, to determine who the next leaders are, to impact critical infrastructure like power, food supplies, trade, all of that. And what if you're, let's say, being embargoed? Or what if there's international restrictions against you and you can't trade and you need hard currency? Let me think of a way now that I could acquire hard currency, preferably by those who are putting sanctions in place, and then I could use that to run my government and build my military. Right? This is the exact problem that Iran, North Korea, now Russia have encountered. And when those sanctions go in place, what happens? Ransomware attacks. Wow, ransomware attacks predominantly against the countries and organizations that sanctioned, and you're demanding millions of dollars, and those millions of dollars are now going back to those countries. Okay, it's a way of getting around sanctions. It's a way of bringing in more hard currency. So countries are seeing this as another lever. It's another tool in the toolbox. And unfortunately, they realize it's really cost effective. You don't have to have a physical border or even be in the same hemisphere as the opposing country. It's cheap, easy to do, and it works. Okay.
Add that to hard to attribute if you leverage quote unquote allies that aren't within your borders, and a lot of potential benefit on that front. To turn that inward now. Okay. Your number 6 is still government oriented, but less about levers against others, but levers against oneself.
Their own internal population, right? Oppressive governments really like to stay in power, right? That tends to be like job one. If you're going to be a dictator or an oppressive ruler, stay in power. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, those oppressive people, when they are booted out of power, their life doesn't tend to go so well after that. So they are highly motivated to stay in power and as long as they can. Part of that is about control. And if you can keep your own populace in the dark, or if you can control what they see and hear, because that's how we build our beliefs. We build our beliefs based on what information we have, our experiences, things of that sort. If you can control the narrative, if you can control what they're being taught in schools and what they can see on the news and what they can download off of the internet, and you control those narratives, especially if you actually write the narratives and say this is all they get to ever see, and we will block everything else, that really helps. You know what else helps? Finding those people that don't like you, don't like the current government. And we now have these digital tools. These digital tools gather so much information. So governments can do a search to see who's talking, who's texting, who's chatting, who's writing articles, right? Who's making phone calls and talking with people in a negative way about the current government. Let me identify those people. Let me find out where they work, where they live, where they go to school. And from that point, only bad things happen. We've seen
a bit of Black Mirror.
Yeah. We've literally seen things to the extent of people showing up in masks in the middle of the night, grabbing those individuals, and those individuals are never seen again. We've seen other more subtle impacts. Oh, you've written a blog that says you don't like the government or you've criticized the government. You know what? You just lost your job today. Did I forget to mention that? Yeah, your employer's sending you a message. Oh, by the way, yeah, your children aren't going to get into the university anymore. Yeah, their application has been denied. They're being kicked out of the university. Yeah. Did I mention? Oh, by the way, your credit score, your social score is now way down. You're not going to be able to get a loan or afford the new car. That's a shame. Patriots, however, people who support the current regime, they get all these benefits. So it can be subtle as well.
Yeah, and I think to me that's and I mean, different cultures have a different understanding and different experience that either, I don't know, lets them accept it, tolerate it, embrace it. And to your point, maybe the different sides, supporters, antagonists, what have you. A little bit off topic here, but I touched on it earlier. For the benefit of society, we monitor more.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering, because we did see in 2022 governments using social media and other technologies to continue to clamp down and surveil and control that narrative as you just described. Do you have a sense of that process being stepped up in places that aren't viewed as oppressive, but could easily turn on a dime if a particular person or party or some event takes place that then changes how those tools and new things that are put in place are used against the civilians?
Absolutely. In fact, I expect more data collection, aggregation, and analysis to occur across the board everywhere that it is not challenged. So, our digital environment, everything that we strap on our wrists or put on our face or climb in to go somewhere or log in, or all of that provides tremendous digital footprints and data and knowledge. It is a wealth of information. And we tend to, as humans, not look at something as bad until we actually feel the pain. So what if the government is tracking everybody that's talking on Twitter and they're tracking the locations of where they're at? Who cares? No big deal, right? Until you're a person in Arab Spring standing or marching for freedom, right, in a peaceful march, and suddenly the government then uses that information to know who was in that peaceful march, and then people start disappearing at night. Oh, whoa, wait a second. Whoa, we didn't, not now, because it could be me. Time out. I don't want that. That's obviously bad. So we have an axiom in cybersecurity, right? Security is not relevant until it fails. And people tend not to take security and privacy seriously until they feel the negative impacts. They or somebody they know, until it touches their lives. And without that tension, these powerful tools and data are going to be used. They're going to be gathered. And that's why we're seeing an uptick in privacy, and organizations and even groups and people and communities saying, hey, privacy is important. It really is. Surveillance is also important to a certain extent. We want to be able to detect criminals and child molesters and human trafficking and all those things. Yes, yes, yes. But we also don't want to have that data persecute or negatively impact people and citizens that are behaving legally and ethically. So there becomes this tension in the system, and that's good. And we as a society have to figure out where that right balance is. And that's something we're growing into. Nobody's got it figured out. We're growing into
Marco
that
has it
discussion.
figured out. But he's not ready to give us the answer.
He's got everything figured out. He just doesn't want to tell us.
That's right. Let's. I'm conscious of time here, and we can
Okay.
talk for hours, I'm sure. But let's kind of bounce off of this point, because now you're talking tons of data about tons of people and tons of places, and I mean signals and sensors and bears. Oh my! The only way to really get our heads wrapped around this is to not actually use our own heads, but use an artificial one. So your seventh prediction is that AI is going to really play a big role in cyber tooling. And
Yes.
so obviously we transitioned from surveillance, but let's just say looking for the bad and all of that noise, AI is going to have a role. Did it actually come to fruition? I know, look at any vendors messaging, they have it sorted out, but where do we really stand with that?
Okay, well, let's look at Chat GPT. Let's look at deep fakes. Let's look at all the adversarial networks that have been developed in 2022 that are taking all that digital data we talked about, right? The data lakes, and it's not even lakes anymore. It's oceans and moons of liquid data out there. And our brains can't process that, but developing artificial systems, yes, they can analyze it and aggregate it and come up with all sorts of new viewpoints and conclusions, and even generate new things, right? I was looking at a video of this woman, and she's talking, and I can't remember what she was talking about. And the caption below it was, "This is entirely fake. We used Chat GPT to create some text. We created we used adversarial networks to create a deep fake of a woman's head and shoulders talking. We used voice synthesizers to be able to pronounce it in a, it was in English, but, a dialect and everything else. The mouth is moved in perfect unison of it. So this is entirely synthetic, not a real person. A real person didn't write the words that they're saying and didn't speak the sounds, the speech that she had. So we were able to do lots of different things there. AI is powerful. It's a powerful tool. And you know who loves powerful tools? The bad guys.
Yes.
They love these powerful tools to be able to generate social engineering attacks, for example. And we saw that in 2022. We saw social engineering attacks of phone calls with voice modulation of someone's boss telling them, you need to cut a PO to this company immediately. Well, that's my boss's voice. Of course he's the CEO. Of course I'm going to go do this. We saw people create entire profiles, right? And entire chains of profiles in things like LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter and so forth, right? That were all fictitious. Why? Because that helps with social engineering. We've seen AI tools dive in for phishing attacks and be able to grab open source intelligence to be able to craft phishing messages, spear phishing messages that are specific to an individual person and be very relevant. This is just the tip. This is just what we saw towards the back end of last year.
Those are all the point of the spear. How about the backstop that's catching these arrows?
Well, as we feel the pain, right, then the good guys come up with things like a Princeton professor just this last week came up with an algorithm that could detect Chat GPT when it creates like writes a paper. So a tool like this could be used by professors to see, well, if students are just giving their assignments to AI to write the paper, read the book, and give them a synopsis or whatever, so, and again, now becomes the escalating tug of war. Okay, that one tool can do it okay, the tool will improve, but guess what? The AI tools are going to get better to sound more like people. And even now, you can go to these AI systems and say, write a paper in the voice of Sean, and they will analyze how you normally write, how you normally speak, your vocabulary, and write something just as if you would. So it's just going to be a race, but that's okay. That brings in the tension that we need. The last thing we want is a tool that can be misused and not having any counter tools to detect or prevent or respond to it. But it's a whole new area of warfare. Oh, by the way, for those security folks, whole new area of warfare you need to worry about, and your budgets are going to shrink. Yeah.
And good luck having staff.
Yes. Or hiring somebody. Yes.
So your thoughts on this? Clearly, there's enough compute power to do some of these things one-off. I don't know how advanced they can get, where we're now having conversations between multiple deepfakes in humans, and if we bring it to the cyber worlds, artificially driven attacks and artificial intelligence enabled defenses. I don't know how far we get there, but my question is kind of leading to your next prediction: quantum computing. So do our CPUs today have enough to do what do we need to do to protect against what's possible with the current compute power? I know GPUs are kind of bring it to the next level. What does quantum do? Do we need quantum to protect against ourselves here, or is that just going to make
it a different way of computing things, right? And the technology has lots of different ramifications. When it comes to AI, our normal CPU, GPUs, and then the AI enhanced silicon that's coming out that we're starting to see, those are really optimized for certain AI routines, certain deep learning algorithms, things of that sort. When we get to quantum, what the shorter term risk, the near risk with quantum is its ability to undermine how we secure data, typically data in transit, but also data at rest, how it potentially could undermine encryption, security keys, public-private keys, things of that sort. We've known this to be a problem with things like Shor's algorithm, which is really good at undermining things like RSA security. Think of public-private keys, right? That kind of security. That computing, when it gets powerful enough, can undermine it. So there's been ongoing efforts to identify quantum-resistant algorithms. And there's a whole bunch of them. NIST is actually kind of leading the way for the United States. By the way, different regions in the world do their own. So encryption standards here in the US are completely different than the ones in China. Okay. So in the US and Western countries, they're all kind of working together to figure out what are those next algorithms that will replace RSA and some other things like that. And they're working on them. But it's a race, because as these quantum computers get faster and faster, they get closer to being able to crack that, right? Crack it like an egg and get into all that data and files. So we have a problem there. Now, my prediction was, and this is the wildest prediction that I had, was we were actually going to see quantum computers proof of concept, be able to get to a state, probably with an improved Shor's algorithm or something similar, to be able to break some of these algorithms in a much faster way that would kind of panic the world. So we did have some issues this year. We did accelerate the quantum, it was kind of a bake-off. And to the point of NIST coming out, not with one, right, new algorithm. They came out with, I want to say, 4 different algorithms to replace the legacy ones. Okay. And they said, some may eventually be better than others. We're really not sure, but here's 4. Just go. Just get ready. Which is a little unusual. It seemed a little rushed, but that's okay because we needed those. We also saw there were, and that was out of a finalist of, I want to say 10, right? They picked 4. And they had been working on these 10 for years. This year, in 2022, they actually were able to fully crack one of those other competitors. And it was shocking. Everybody was like, what? This was one of our finalists. And it wasn't one of the 4 that they announced, but it was one of the kind of the backup ones behind those that they were able to go, yeah, it just occurred to us. If we just do X, Y, and Z and we do this, we break it. Oh, good to know. Good to know. Okay, that's off the potential list. We're done with that one. But again, things are moving so fast. So if I had to rate myself on this one, I would say this did not come to fruition in 2022. I hope this doesn't come to fruition in 2023, but there's probably a good chance that there's going to be more events that accelerate and motivate people to start moving in that direction for quantum resistant or quantum proof algorithms to protect today's data or tomorrow's data. Yesterday's data, it'll get cracked eventually. Yeah. But, moving forward. So I would say that I did not. This is not a good prediction for me from last year.
Thankfully. I know there's an increased level of conversation around this.
Yeah.
For certain. And also rooted in encryption technologies. Our final point, it's 9th on your list, but since we already covered 10, this will be the final point for our chat today on your list. Number 9 is cryptocurrency, and becomes a magnet for theft, tax, and fraud. One could easily at this point to the last element of fraud. I don't know if that's just human greed fraud there, or if it was actual technically driven fraud. But I don't know. Who knows what's really going on there? I don't know if any of the
You're talking FTX.
I'm talking FTX. I don't know what's going on there. Clearly there's some shenanigans going on. I don't know how much of it is a single person or an entity, or if there's misinformation or compromise behind the scenes that drove some of that. I don't know, because I haven't been following it that closely. Maybe you have some insight.
I have been following it, but we will find out the facts probably in short order here in the next few months, given the cooperation that some of the people in Alameda Research and even in FTX have come forth. And their CEO, although he has, claimed pleaded not guilty to those charges a few days ago, we're gonna uncover some stuff now. That there was a lot of fraud there, but and you may not realize this, but there was also a hack as part of that fraud, and it was for about $400 million worth. Just as these organizations started to fall apart, suddenly they were hacked. And $400 million disappeared. And in fact, it just started getting separated and put through some mixers a couple of days ago. So the attackers are trying to launder this cryptocurrency. But you bring up a good question. Is it just fraud, or is it fraud that is facilitated by the technology? And I would say it's actually a combination. Right? We see fraud in financial institutions, right? We see Ponzi schemes and things of that sort, right? Madoff, for example, right? The largest Ponzi scheme ever in traditional finance. But when we look at crypto, and how those organizations are run, and both the transparency and the ability to hide things, it makes it a lot more interesting. In fact, it was because the very transparency that these investigative reporters were able to detect there were problems. And they published articles which created the bank run that then forced FTX into disillusionment, into having to give up and going eventually into bankruptcy and whatnot. But if we just look at the fraud, FTX $400 million account. We had in 2022, Axie Infinity was hit with over $600 million theft. Wormhole Bridge was hit for 400? No, 300 and change. FTX was hit with 400. Binance was hit with a little over $500 million in an attack. And they were able to recover some of that. So it, whittled down to only 100 million and change. We had Beanstalk, Mango. Those were well over $100 million as well. We saw lots of different attacks and fraud and theft go on, impacting the cryptocurrency, industries, and victimize those users there. While the price was also going down. So, the people in cryptocurrency have really suffered in 2022. And a good chunk of that is also because of cyber criminals, fraud, both internal and external, all sorts of different reasons. But the bad guys have been targeting crypto. It's where the money is. And in some cases, it's easy to get a hold of, $100 million here or there without a whole lot of work. We've seen individual attacks, one person secure over $100 million, right, from one cryptocurrency app. That's huge. That's a massive bankroll there for one person.
A few months worth of living anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Depending on your lifestyle. But we're probably not going to see that change, right? Wherever there's money, the attackers are always nearby. And because crypto was, and still to a good extent, is not very secured, it was the rush to market. Let's develop all these products and tools and just worry about, being successful. Security was an afterthought. And we warned the industry. We weren't keeping it a secret. We were telling them, you're going to get abused. No. I see all these zeros coming in. It's fine. Until it isn't fine. Goes back to that first axiom, right? It's not relevant until it fails and you crater and die. Okay, now it's relevant. Too late.
Not a problem until it is. Boy. And again, there's so many angles to take on this one in terms of, that's loss of cryptocurrency value, which then translates back to real dollars and other currencies, and people rely on it for income. I know some folks that live off of that money, and maybe a little less now in some cases. Maybe people aren't buying houses and cars if they lost,
and planes with crypto. Yes.
So, and then you bring it down. I don't know if we joked about the lifestyle of 100 million, but even tens of thousands can impact how somebody spends their money or not, and
yes,
the economic impact that has, or could have, or has had. Who knows?
Oh yeah.
Well, Matthew, as I said at the beginning, blowing my mind 10 times over here, right along with one of your predictions, right? That didn't quite make it. You held up the prediction in this one. For those interested, it might be a fun listen to. We actually did an episode on this to set the stage. We did.
Okay, I vaguely remember that. Yes.
Yeah. So that was the beginning of 2022. We had this conversation to kind of lay this out. So I didn't listen to it again, but I think I might, just to kind of see what we said there. But the reason I mentioned that is it might be fun listen, but as 2023 predictions come around for you, we'll certainly have you back, and hopefully Marco can join as well. But I know this is a long episode. Hopefully everybody's enjoying. I certainly did. But I don't want to cut it too short anyway. I want to give you one minute, a sneak peek at maybe what 2023 might be.
Put me on the spot.
You can be general.
Okay, 60 seconds here, because I haven't published them yet. They've been trouble. 2023 is troublesome. We've talked about some of the themes, right? And I think it's really going to be around the economics of cybersecurity. We've got less budgets, more trouble, and in times of economic downturn, non-profitable organizations like cybersecurity and privacy tend to get smashed the most. So less resources and capabilities. But at the same time, we have, and we've talked about this, right? Nation states, they're starting to realize how cost-effective and efficient cyber operations are, offensive cyber operations. They're going to start pouring a lot more money into it. So we're going to see a lot more funding for research, for vulnerabilities, for exploitations. And in their mindset, they're willing to use these things. And so as soon as they use them, it becomes public. And all the cyber criminals grab it, tear it apart, use whatever pieces they want. And so it does impact everyone. And so we're going to have more attacks. We're going to have more resources on the wrong side of the budget line, coming in to the attacker's side and not on the defender's side. And that's going to shift that tension. And it's going to make cybersecurity much more difficult in 2022. The expectations don't go down. The regulations don't have a blind eye suddenly because budgets are low. They're still going to be enforced. But our capabilities on cybersecurity, it's going to be an uphill struggle. We are going to find ourselves woefully under-resourced compared to the amount of money and funds. We're talking tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars being invested by nations all across the world for offensive operations that eventually we'll have to deal with.
Yeah, I agree with that general prediction. And my hope in response to that, in the spirit of this redefining cybersecurity channel, I think we've talked about this before. To me, the answer isn't, oh, darn it, my budget's cut, I'm going to do less. To me, it's, how do I have a conversation with the business to reduce exposure so I don't have to spend as much?
Yes.
And I'll call that shift left. A lot of people may not like that, but the more we can do to say, let's not do that way right now. Let's not collect that data. Let's not open that service. Let's not expose that to the internet. Let's not store all of our golden eggs in the same basket that everybody knows the name of it because we've labeled it and it's on. You can find its credentials on Shodan. There are some smart ways to manage the business so that we don't overwhelm the security team while crushing their budget and making them forcing them to make a decision on what to leave exposed. Let's just not expose it in the first place. So that's my soapbox. And it felt
100% behind you. I think you nailed it. I mean, there's many things that we have to do, and prioritizing, setting clear goals, understanding what those business trade-offs, and making sure that security is part of that business discussion. It's all important.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I predict we'll have you on again, Matthew, for many different things. I also predict at some point I'll get my act together and I'll be joining you at some point for a chat with you to sound super lame as you grow me on some things. But hopefully everybody enjoyed this. It's always great chatting with you, and the information I believe is super helpful for folks. Definitely gets people to think. So thanks, Matthew, and thanks everybody for listening to this Redefining Cybersecurity episode here on ITSP Magazine.
HITRUST is a leading data protection standards development and certification organization that strives to safeguard sensitive information and manage information risk for global organizations across all industries and throughout the third-party supply chain. Learn more at hightrustalliance.net.
Imperva is the cybersecurity leader whose mission is to protect data and all paths to it with a suite of integrated application and data security solutions. Learn more at imperva.com.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Redefining Cybersecurity with Sean Martin, part of the ITSP Magazine podcast network. If you learned something new and this conversation made you think, then share this channel and itspmagazine.com with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our podcast channels. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. And you can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.